So when I was able to speak with the confessor, I told him everything that the Lord had told me. And since the Lord had said to me those words, "for a certain given time," without notifying me of the exact time during which I was to suffer continuously, I took it as about 40 days, more or less, and now it has been about 12 years that I continue to be in it. But may God be always blessed. May his inscrutable judgments be always adored. I believe that if the blessed Lord had let me understand with clarity the length of time I was to be in bed, my nature would have been frightened very much and would hardly have submitted itself to it. Although I remember that I have always been resigned, yet I did not know then the preciousness of the cross, as the Lord has made me know during the course of these 12 years, nor would the confessor have adapted himself to give me the obedience. So I said to the confessor that the Lord wanted him to give me the obedience to remain in continuous suffering for about 40 days, and I told him all the rest. To my surprise, because I thought it was impossible, the confessor told me that if it was truly the will of God, he would give me the obedience, because in reality, it was not that he could not come, but rather a little bit of human respect. My soul rejoiced very much, for I would be able to content the Lord and therefore have the creatures spared. But my nature was very much afflicted in receiving this obedience, so much so that for a few days I was very saddened. My soul also was affected very much, thinking that I was to remain for such a long time without being able to receive Jesus in the sacrament, my sole and only comfort. At times I felt a war so fierce within me that I myself did not know what had happened to me. The devil too added many things to it, but my good Jesus put a remedy to everything, and this is how he did it. I move on to speak about something else. By order of the current confessor, I will obey in manifesting the various ways in which the Lord has spoken to me. It seems to me that the ways in which the Lord has spoken to me are 4, but these 4 ways of speaking of Jesus are very different from the inspirations. 1. The first way is when the soul goes out of herself. However, first I want to explain a little bit better this going out of myself. It happens in 2 ways. The first is instantaneous, almost a flash, and it is so sudden that it seemed to me that the body would lift a little bit from the bed in order to follow the soul, but then it would stay there, and it seemed to me that the body would remain as dead, while the soul would follow Jesus, walking throughout the whole universe, the earth, the air, the seas, the mountains, purgatory, and heaven, where many times he showed me the place where I will be after I die. The other way, then, for the soul to go out is more quiet. It seems that the body dozes off insensibly and remains as though petrified in the presence of Jesus Christ. However, the soul remains with the body, and the body no longer feels anything of external things. Even if all the universe turned upside down, even if they burned me up and reduced me to pieces. These 2 ways, so different, of going out of myself, I have noticed sensibly, because in the first way, having to obey the confessor, when he would come to wake me up, I would see him from the place where Jesus would lead me, that is, from the ends of the earth, or from the air, or from the mountains, or from the sea, or from purgatory, or even from heaven itself. Even more, it seemed to me that I would not have enough time, so that the soul would be found in the body by the confessor, and therefore I would not be able to obey. It seemed that, so far away as I was with my soul, I say it seemed to me, that I would bustle about and become all anxious and worried that I might not be able to let myself be found there in time by the confessor, and therefore I would not be able to obey. However, I confess that I have always found myself there in time, And it seemed to me that the soul would enter into the body before the confessor would begin to give me the obedience to wake up. Even more, I tell the truth, many times from afar I could see the confessor coming, but in order not to leave Jesus, it seemed that I would not think that the confessor was coming. And then Jesus, he himself, would hurry me to return with the soul into the body so as to be able to obey the confessor. And then I would feel a great reluctance of leaving Jesus, but obedience would win. And in leaving Jesus, he himself would either kiss me or embrace me, or would do something else to take leave of me. And I, upon leaving my dear Jesus, would say to him, I go to the confessor, but you, my good Jesus, come back soon as the confessor goes. These then are the two ways in which the soul seems to go out of the body. And in these two ways in which the soul goes out, God speaks to me. This way of speaking, he himself calls intellectual speaking. I will try to explain it. After the soul has gone out of the body, finding herself before Jesus, she has no need of words in order to understand what the Lord wants to tell her. Nor does the soul need to speak in order to make herself understood, but by means of the intellect. Oh, how well we understand each other when we are together. From a light that comes from Jesus into my intellect, I feel everything that Jesus wants to make me understand, being impressed within me. This way is a very high and sublime, so much so that the nature can hardly adapt itself to explain it with words. It can barely give some idea. This way of Jesus making himself understood is extremely rapid. In one simple instant, one learns many sublime things, more than by reading entire books. Oh, what a most ingenious teacher Jesus is. In one single instant, he teaches so many things, while to someone else it would take entire years, if he manages at all. Because the terrestrial teacher does not have the power of being able to draw the will of his disciple, or to infuse things in his mind without effort and toil. But not with Jesus. His sweetness, the loveliness of his gesture, the gentleness of his speaking are so great, and then he is so beautiful, that as soon as the soul sees him, she feels drawn. That sometimes the speed with which she runs after Jesus is so great that almost without realizing it, she finds herself transformed into the beloved in such a way that the soul is no longer capable of distinguishing her terrestrial being, so much is she identified with the divine being. Who can say what the soul feels in this state? It would take Jesus himself or a soul perfectly separated from the body, because in finding herself surrounded once again by the wall of the body and losing that light which before kept her submerged, the soul loses much and remains obscured. So if she tries to say something, she can only do it roughly. To give an idea, I will say that I imagine someone born blind who has never had the good of seeing what is contained in the entire universe. And for a few minutes he had the good of opening his eyes to the light and was able to see everything that is contained in the world, the sun, the heavens, the sea, the many cities, the many machines, the varieties of flowers, and many other things that are in the world. And after those few minutes of light, he returned to the blindness of before. Now, could he describe distinctly everything that he has seen? He could give a sketch, say a few things confusedly. Now something similar happens when the soul finds herself separated and then back into the body. I don't know whether I am speaking nonsense. Just as that poor blind one would remain in the sorrow of the lost sight, the same for the soul. She lives moaning and almost in a violent state, because the soul feels always violently drawn to the highest good. The attraction toward himself that Jesus leaves in the soul is so great that the soul would like to remain always attracted within her God. But this cannot be, and therefore she lives as if she lived in purgatory. I add that the soul has nothing of her own in this state. Everything is the operating that the Lord does. Now I will try to explain the second way that Jesus has in speaking. And it is when the soul, finding herself outside of herself, sees the person of Jesus Christ, for example, as a child or crucified, or in any other attitude, and the soul sees the Lord pronouncing the words from his mouth, and the soul answers from her mouth. Sometimes it happens that the soul begins to converse with Jesus, just as two intimate spouses would do. However, the speaking of the Lord is very moderate, just 4 or 5 words, and sometimes even just 1 word. Very rarely does it prolong a little bit. But in that very little speaking, how much light he introduces into the soul. I seem to see a little rivulet at the first sight, but in looking more closely, instead of a rivulet, one can see an immense sea. Such is 1 word spoken by Jesus. The immensity of the light that it leaves in the soul is such that in ruminating it thoroughly, she discovers so many things, sublime and profitable for her soul, as to remain astonished. I believe that if all the learned would unite together, they would remain confounded and mute at 1 single word of Jesus. Now this way is more suitable for the human nature, and it can easily be manifested, because the soul, upon entering herself, brings with her that which she has heard from the mouth of our Lord, and communicates it to the body. It is not so easy when it is through the intellect. To me, I think that Jesus has this way of speaking in order to adapt himself to the human nature. It is not that he needs the word in order to make himself understood, but in this way the soul understands more easily, and she can manifest it to the confessor. In sum, Jesus acts like a most knowledgeable, wise, intelligent teacher who possesses all sciences to the highest degree, and no one can equal him. But since he finds himself amid disciples who have not yet learned the first syllables of the alphabet, keeping all the other studies within himself, he teaches the A, B, C to the disciples. Oh, how good Jesus is! He adapts himself to the learned and speaks to them in a very high manner, in such a way that in order to understand him, they have to study well what he tells them. And he adapts himself to the ignorant, pretending to be, he himself, a little bit ignorant. And he speaks in a low manner, in such a way that no one may remain on an empty stomach from the lesson of the divine teacher.